Hello, Marc. Welcome to Polysphere interview.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Okay, and under leadership, Polygon Labs has focused on significant initiatives on such as Polygon 2.0, which aims to enhance the scalability and interconnectedness of Polygon ecosystem. To set a foundation for our discussion, could you start by explaining what Polygon 2.0 is and why is it needed?
Yeah, sure. So Polygon 2.0 kind of reflects our view of like the end state of blockchain scaling. So specifically, right, what our view is that one big monolithic chain is never going to be able to grow to the size of the internet. And so as a result of that, we have believed for a long time that scaling is going to need to be done on L2s and multiple L2s to be specific. And we'd expect thousands, if not tens of thousands, or not millions of chains at one point down the road. But that's not good enough, having lots of chains. You also need those chains to actually create a good user experience. And so our view is not just lots of chains, but lots of chains that are interconnected and that are able to transact with one another and across chains. And so Polygon 2.0 is really this vision of bringing that end state to life by bringing together like the possibility of having many, many chains and therefore being able to scale infinitely while unifying the users and the liquidity across all of those chains.
There are some very crucial progress of Polygon 2.0 and which matters to every normal users, such as Matic will transit to POL. So when will that happen? And about Polygon PoS, it also a lot of users are using Polygon PoS, and we heard that it's gonna be connected to Polygon 2.0. So when that's gonna happen?
Yeah. So I think like maybe it's worth kind of backing up to like what are the different components that bring kind of Polygon 2.0 together. And I think the things that are probably worth focusing on is one is Polygon CDK, which is the Polygon chain development kit. And that allows for really easily spinning up new chains that are secured with ZK technology. The second very important thing is the Agglayer. And the Agglayer is really our means of bringing all of these chains together and allowing for interoperability between the chains. But as you pointed out, there's other things that we have going on that kind of make up Polygon 2.0. One of them is this transition from kind of Matic to PoL. This is a transition that we're expecting to happen in Q3 this year. And I think one of the things that's important for users to know is that it shouldn't really change their user experience. It actually allows for, it's being built in a way that intentionally allows for the easy kind of use of Matic, pulling PoL back out, and then using PoL as gas and for staking down the road. So users really don't need to like think about that transition too much. And then another part of it is what we refer to as kind of ZK PoS. It's upgrading the proof of stake chain to a ZK Validium. And really the idea here is a few things. First, it's going to allow for the best experience possible on the Agglayer. By being secured by ZK technology, it's going to be able to have much more security and lower latency. This is really important. When you think about Polygon PoS, it's one of the biggest chains in the world, and it has integrations with pretty much every major centralized exchange. And so what that means is that from those centralized exchanges, you can easily onboard onto Polygon PoS, which through the Agglayer also means they can onboard to every single chain that is part of the Agglayer. And so once we first, we're actually going to make that integration with the Agglayer and PoS happen. And then later, and that'll probably be early next year, we'll upgrade it to kind of ZK PoS. At which point, I think the debate on whether Polygon PoS is an L2 or not goes away. And everybody can clearly agree that it's an L2 at that point.
Yeah, you mentioned Agglayer. Agglayer is a critical component of Polygon 2.0 and very central to understanding its core. So I think next part we can talk about Agglayer. And to understanding its necessity and importance, I think we can challenge it because we are all saying that aggregation is very important, but there are some voices that are opposite to it. So we can challenge it by their voices. So the first voice is about, regarding the motivations of the real demand for liquidity sharing. because a large L2 ecosystems, they may focus on more of their own community and growing their own liquidity, because that's matters a lot to them, and that's worth a lot to them, and this pay out a lot. So, but while smaller L2s, even they are with liquidity, but they still may not have many users. So this is the first thing we want to challenge it. So does this mean there's no real demand for liquidity sharing? The second voice comes from the user experience of complexity, interoperability. We've done a lot of transitions. It's give us a lot of headache. So many users are tired of this complex interoperability. Some believe using L1 alone is enough. They're not willing to deal with the complexity of multiple cooperations. So how do you address these concerns?
I think I'll start with the first one in terms of there's no demand for kind of unified liquidity. I think what we see is generally users are attracted to where liquidity is. And usually liquidity brings more liquidity. And one of the challenges that every L2 has had to face is that when they spin up, they now need to attract liquidity from scratch. And this results in a lot of things. So first, you've got builders who maybe aren't frankly specialists in finance, looking to kind of build an entire ecosystem around DeFi. They are now stuck having to figure that out. And most of the time what that means is they need to issue a token and they need to play games with those tokens to bring more users. In a state where you have unified liquidity, they don't need to do that. They can just worry about building the application that they're really focused on building, whether that's like a game, really anything they could be building. And they can let other chains worry about building up liquidity, and they can use that liquidity, or their users can use that liquidity at any point in time. And so while there isn't really good evidence of a desire for like unified liquidity, because frankly, there's no good solution right now, what we do know is that when we talk to anyone, whether it's a user or a developer, about the Agglayer, and we let them know what it's about and how it'll work, every single one is excited by it, because they face their own issues of needing to go to one L2, and then they realize there isn't that much liquidity for a trade, and they actually have to go to another L2 to execute that trade. And then another L2 spins up, now they need to go over there, and there's no liquidity over there. So everyone's kind of like experienced this in the Ethereum environment. And so I think that's why people are excited by it. And I think once the Agglayer kind of really launches and takes off, I think people are going to be like, oh, okay, now I get to actually experience that. And that ties into the second point that you bring up, which is like this idea of like the cross-chain UX. And I think the reason people have such a bad experience with that is because the current solutions that exist aren't good. And that's not because they haven't built something that's good for what's available right now, but they're really not built in an optimal way. So there's a few things about the Agglayer that actually make it like optimal. Probably the most important thing about it is we have what we refer to as like a unified bridge. And so this is one bridge contract for all of the chains. Now, interestingly, we're building it so that the chains can still control their own assets within that bridge, but it's still one unified bridge. And what that allows for is what we refer to as asset fungibility. What it means is that if you think of the current environment, when you have ETH and you want to transfer it to another chain, what's essentially happening, right, is you're locking up that ETH and you're getting a new ETH, and it's some wrapped version of ETH. The two versions of ETH are not fungible whatsoever. And the native assets on one chain are not fungible with other assets or that same asset on another chain. And so when anyone wants to actually interact with assets, what they're dealing with is like these wrapped versions that have all these weird names, like ETH, and all these other names, right? And that kind of experience results in people looking at their wallets and being like, what do I do? The nice thing with the Agglayer is there will be no difference between those assets. ETH is ETH. Matic is Matic. Uni is Uni. You don't actually need to worry about what that is. So to me, that's step number one on like making it even possible for you. Without that, you can't even have it. Like there's no hope at a good user experience. So that's number one. Number two is the Agglayer is being built in a very like neutral way and low level way that allows for anyone to build the UX that they want on top of it. So now that we've given them asset fungibility and people don't have to worry about what it's on, now all we need to focus on is really creating that wallet experience or app experience on top of the Agglayer. that just really hides the different chains because you don't need to know the chains. It's not important at that point in time. And so the Agglayer, because of A, that asset fungibility, but B, the security that it allows between chains, and specifically what I mean by that is the way the Agglayer is built, is it ensures that when you do a cross-chain transfer, that you can never be rugged by another chain. That's like the key premise of the Agglayer. So like a chain that you're on can always rug you because, well, they can always rug you if that's what the chain allows. But when you're doing a cross-chain transaction using the Agglayer, we ensure through the way the Agglayer is built that will not happen. And so what that allows for, when you build that kind of with the idea of like asset fungibility, what you have is the ability to transfer assets that all look the same across chains in a safe way where you don't need to worry about that. And now all we need is a good UX built on top of it. And we have great wallet builders and app developers throughout Web3 who can build that amazing UX and take advantage of like the core infrastructure of the Agglayer.
That's amazing. So in that case, will by the end of year, will 100 chains be able to connect to Agglayer?
Yeah. So we already have, I believe we're at 5 chains connected to the Agglayer right now. And when I say the Agglayer, I mean a very, very, very early version of the Agglayer that does not do much at all. It is not like I would not look at the Agglayer that currently exists and say, oh, this is the kind of experience we're trying to create. That is not the case at all. But I would expect that in Q3, you will see a version of the Agglayer come out that actually starts showing the type of experience that I'm referring to. Now, the first version that'll come out in Q3 of this year is a version that is going to have that asset fungibility, but the cross-chain transfers are still going to be relatively slow. They will probably be, several minutes long, probably over 10 minutes still. By the end of the year, our goal is to get it to under 10 minutes. And then next year, our goal is to get those cross-chain transfers like in seconds, if not under a second.
Okay, that's amazing. Under the progress, pessimistic proof is a new progress. So Agglayer just announced that. And actually, ZK proofs they are all very quite pessimistic. And so because they are pessimistic, so which requiring, significant computational power. And, a lot of computational power means that they will increase the cost. So will this increase the cost of cross-chain transactions for users? And if it is, L2s, compared to L1s, if an L2, it is not much cheap, and it also sacrifices the decentralization, and will it still be appealing to developers and normal users?
Yeah, I love this question. So I think ZK technology is one of the most misunderstood technologies in the space. I think it's newer in its development than others, and therefore people who really aren't deep in it don't understand its potential. And this includes other L2s who don't deal with ZK technology. Given that we have probably the leading ZK tech team, we have the advantage of actually kind of knowing what's on like the forefront from a technical perspective. And to answer your question, there's a few key things here. So first, the ZK technology is getting more performant, like pretty much like by the day. When we released our type 1 prover earlier this year, and we looked at the performance metrics, they were like significantly better than even we expected that they were going to be. And we're still expecting like at least 50x improvements on kind of those costs. And the costs already are not even that high. But those costs are just going to continue to be driven down more and more through various optimizations and eventually through hardware. And so we're going to get to a point where just your pure L2 chain with a kind of prover on it is going to not really cost you any more than an optimistic rollup whatsoever. And this is particularly true when you think of optimistic rollups, like from a full kind of big picture perspective. When you think of ZK rollups, and all rollups, what you need to think about is not just transaction costs, but also withdrawal costs. And when you think of optimistic rollups, one of the issues that you have is you have this 7-day withdrawal period that ends up being really long. And so most people don't want to wait that. And so they use some faster method to bridge. But the thing is, they're paying an extremely high fee to do that, so that can be filled and somebody else can take the risk on that 7-day period. Once you start looking at the economic cost of that transaction and you then spread it out over all of the transactions that are being executed, what you actually start realizing is that optimistic rollups are actually more expensive than ZK rollups already. Now, one more component that is really important is that one thing we haven't talked about the Agglayer is that the Agglayer is also going to have what we refer to as proof aggregation. And so what that basically means is that we are going to take proofs from every single chain that is connected to the Agglayer, and we are going to combine them together. So the way to think about it is you got proof from chain 1 and proof from chain 2, and you can combine those two proofs together. And then you can take proof from chain 3, and you can combine it with that same proof. And you can continue to combine them before you put them on Ethereum. And so what that does is it reduces the cost of proving to Ethereum significantly. And basically what it does is it amortizes all the proving costs across basically all the users on every chain. And so when you take all of these factors together, what you're going to end up with is a situation where ZK technology is actually going to end up resulting in like a cheaper total like economic experience than what you get with optimistic rollups. And I'd argue that that's basically the case already. But once we add kind of proof aggregation to the Agglayer, it'll like very much be the case.
Okay. And talking about ZK rollups, Polygon has a Polygon CT case, which plays a very important role. And you expressed, I read your article, and you point out that actually L3 layers are unnecessary and L2s can completely fulfill this role. And I think you are mentioning, the CDKs, right? And the CDKs can developers can use the CDK to deploy a layer 2 very quickly. So do you believe that CDK can take on this responsibility? And also, Vitalik ever said that future L2s will all involve into ZK rollups. So what are your thoughts on this? And do you think CDK can accelerate this progress?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I think the way to look at it is that the question you have to ask yourself is like, why do L3s exist in the first place? And the only reason they exist is because some chains and some developers of chains do not have ZK technology. They have fraud proofs. And as a result of that, they don't have the best technology available to them. And so they need to do something to make up for it. And so they say, rather than having an L2 where it's going to take you 7 days to withdraw, and where it's going to be kind of very expensive to withdraw, and it's going to be very expensive to onboard because they don't have any good interoperability, they say, just go on an L3 and let the L2 do everything for you. Except that's very, very limiting when you do that, because now you're an L3 on top of an L2. Now you're taking different security assumptions than you are if you're on top of an L1. There's also even longer withdrawal delays to go through L2. Now you've got an L2 that can potentially censor the L3. Tons of issues that come with it. And the question is then, but these benefits of being an L3, can you get them as an L2? And the answer from our perspective is yes, and you get them in two ways. You combine CDK with the Agglayer. And the reason is because when you think of, okay, well, can we drive down costs of transactions on an L2? We just talked about this. We can drive them down through proof aggregation. We don't actually need to have every transaction going one-to-one to Ethereum. You batch them, put them in proofs, put those proofs together again, and you never actually need to touch Ethereum that often, and therefore the costs end up being just as low as using an L3. The other argument is, well, the onboarding is much easier because you can onboard straight to the L2 and then go to the L3. But the thing is, when you combine CDK and the Agglayer, you don't even need to go L2 to L3. You can literally just go to L2. Now, what I mean by that is, as I was talking about earlier, when you have Polygon PoS that is already connected to every major centralized exchange, and Polygon PoS is connected to the Agglayer, now what you can do is you can just go centralized exchange through PoS and the Agglayer to any chain that is connected to the Agglayer. So you never even have to, it's even a better experience than going to an L3 where you need to bridge up to the L3. And so when you kind of go across all of these arguments for L3s, what you just realize is you don't actually need them if you have the right technology to develop L2s with interoperability, which we're doing with CDK and Agglayer. And that's why we're so against L3s, is because we're really telling developers, hey, here's this worst technology because you don't have the right technology with this developer. So here's the technology that you can use so that you can actually create the right user experience and actually have the correct kind of security and the best experience possible. And so that's really kind of like why it is that we believe that kind of sticking with L2s and CDK and Agglayer makes more sense than L3s. And answering that second part of your question in terms of Vitalik, it's believing everything's going to become ZK, it kind of ties into this nicely, which is, as I was saying at the beginning, like the reason we have L3s is simply because there are development teams that do not have ZK technology. If they had ZK technology and they could build the same things that we're building, what they would realize is you don't need L3s. And it's because Vitalik is right, is that when you have ZK technology, you can have much faster, cheaper, and secure chains than any L2 that doesn't use it.
Okay, and I think, before when we are talking about L2s, we are mentioning Ethereum L2s, but now Bitcoin's L2s are emerging. So, and also they also involved with ZK stuff and so on. So will Polygon considering build another Bitcoin L2 in the future?
Yeah, we're not focused on that. Like our belief is that Ethereum is the settlement layer that makes the most sense for purposes of kind of scaling and getting to like really kind of an internet of blockchains as we kind of think about it. And so we have had a lot of conversations with teams that want to use Polygon CDK on Bitcoin. And we're all for that. If people want to use it, it's open source technology. If they want to use it, then they can go ahead and use it. For our purposes, I think that there are trade-offs that you need to make from a centralization and security perspective when trying to build that on Bitcoin in a way that you don't need to with Ethereum. And so Ethereum really is kind of a better option for us. And frankly, it's where we have like most of our community. It's where we've built for a long time. And we really believe like the foundations of Ethereum are built in the way that we kind of want them to be able to scale on top of it.
And Polygon is evolving all the way, and the Polygon DA and the Polygon ID, which is a veil and private ID, they have separated from Polygon. So what impact does this have on Polygon?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's a couple parts of it. So first, one of the things that we really wanted to do is make sure that we focus on the right things rather than trying to do too many things. We already have a lot going on at Polygon, and when you add in DA to that, and then you add in identity to that, it starts becoming like very, very difficult to manage it all and be as effective as possible. And so our thought was, let's focus on the core ZK tech that we need for purposes of scaling, and we can allow others to focus on the rest. And so something like DA, I think, is something that is very popular. One of the things that was nice is when Avail did its airdrop, it still airdropped tokens to Matic holders, recognizing that it used to be a project that was kind of built within Polygon Labs. But ultimately, from our perspective, like DA is not the core of what you need for scaling. There's too many DA solutions. When you really think about it, like if you really want maximum security, you're going to go to directly to Ethereum as a full rollup. If you want a Validium where you're using DA elsewhere, then there are plenty of options, right? There's Avail, there's Celestia, there's Icon DA, there's Near DA. And then on top of that, even if you don't want like a full chain for DA purposes, you can use what we refer to as like data availability committees. And this is something that like down the road, and it's on our roadmap, is allowing all the POS stakers to actually serve as a data availability committee for chains that want to spin up using CDK and be Validiums. And so there's so many options from a DA perspective that it's not something, and it really doesn't like require ZK technology at its core. And so it wasn't something that we really wanted to continue to focus on. The community still benefited from it, which is nice, but not our focus. And same thing, Polygon ID, which spun off as Bravado ID, that does include ZK technology and frankly, very good technology for purposes of really securing identity. But again, when we think of what we're focused on, we're very focused on ZK technology, but for purposes of scaling. And identity is not something that, it's actually something that a lot of us at Polygon are very passionate about, but it does not help for scaling purposes. And so this was a similar thing, is that when we spun off Bravado ID, one of the things we've been very thoughtful about is making sure that the community will benefit from the activity that Bravado ID engages in. And so that's something that we always keep in mind as we kind of like spin this stuff out. But the nice thing is now we've got like two kind of, you could call them like sister companies out there in the community that we care about, that are kind of helping the ecosystem grow, and that are still ending up benefiting the Polygon ecosystem, even though they're kind of more arm's length than before.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think by now we have a understanding of various aspects of Polygon already. So here's the final question. No, not the final. The ending question of Polygon 2.0, that is, when can we expect it to be fully launched? There are a lot of there are 4 layers, the staking layers and other stuff. So what remains to be completed?
Yeah, there's still lots of different parts that need to happen, because it really is a very kind of complete vision of what needs to happen. So I think kind of we've talked on some of it, right? That Matic to POL conversion happening kind of later this year, that ZK kind of PoS kind of upgrade happening probably early next year. We've got the Agglayer, the first kind of what I'll call like robust version of it, coming out in Q3 of this year. So those end up being most of the components. The one we haven't talked about is the staking hub, which is something that we're focused on doing for next year. Again, I think we're trying to like prioritize what it is that is the most impactful, which is kind of the Agglayer right now. And so the staking hub is something that we didn't really touch on it, but effectively what it does is it's going to allow a few things. So first, it's going to allow any CDK chain that wants to decentralize to use kind of that staking hub for purposes of decentralizing. So having like a decentralized set of sequencers and provers. It can also, as I mentioned earlier, serve as a data availability committee. And so the staking hub kind of like opens up a lot of options for chains that want to use CDK. And that ultimately will want to be part of the Agglayer and really grow the Agglayer as a whole. And so when we take all of these pieces and we think of developing them, like the way that we look at it is like 2025 is going to be the year where we've kind of got like early versions or even further along versions of really every component of Polygon 2.0. And from there on, we'll just want to continue kind of evolving them into kind of better versions of themselves.
That's great. Next question is for developers. A lot of developers are looking to build within the Polygon ecosystem. So what steps do you recommend they take? In that case, they can be standing out because there are too many competitors.
Yeah, it is very hard. And it's not just in the Polygon ecosystem, right? It's just across the space in Web3 right now. It is very, very difficult to stand out. And from my perspective, like the key is to start kind of building and shipping something early. I think a lot of people, maybe more in Web3 than in other spaces, honestly spend a lot of time talking and they spend a lot of time thinking about ideas, but they don't spend as much time kind of actually shipping. And I think when there's as much competition as there is, you really need to get like a MVP version of something out earlier and then start like iterating on it. I also think that while I have no problem with like forks of any existing protocols, like that's fine. You can have like innovations on that. I think that developers really need to think hard about like how they can fork something and make really innovative changes to it. I think too often we see forks without really any real changes to them, and I don't think that's really a great way for a developer to get started. And then lastly, I think there's a lot of good like hackathons in the space to go to. So we have kind of a group called Dabble that we funded, and they go out and they are actually growing kind of the Polygon ecosystem from like a DevRel perspective is really kind of where they focus. And so kind of trying to engage with the Dabble team is one good one. Hadron, which is kind of an accelerator in the Polygon ecosystem, is another good source of kind of like looking to work with somebody who can really be there to like support builders. They're very selective in how they actually kind of approach builders and who they bring in to the accelerator, but they're a very good source as well. And then in general, the Polygon community is so big and honestly very, very welcoming. And so when people are looking for support, they're generally able to find it in the Polygon ecosystem. There's a lot of spaces, the Discord. There's a lot of different places, honestly. You just go to Twitter and you basically will find almost anything that you need. But in general, I think that trying to really build something like real right off the bat is going to be like the most useful way to really get attention.
Wonderful. And to wrap up our interview, the last topic maybe we can share about, after the launch of Polygon 2.0, what aspects of progress should users pay attention to? And how can ordinary users seize the opportunity brought by Polygon 2.0?
Yeah, I think the best metrics for how Polygon 2.0 is going is looking at the Agglayer and how the Agglayer is doing when it comes to its growth. And obviously in early days, it'll be slower, but based on all the conversations we have, I think the speed of really seeing protocols join the Agglayer is going to accelerate very fast once that like key initial version is out. And so I think like looking at that is good. And then really, as more and more chains join, there's going to be a lot of opportunities within each of those ecosystems to frankly engage in having fun, honestly, is one part of it. But also just like trying out those cross-chain transactions and realizing how smooth of a UX it is, I think is going to be something that'll be like really, really interesting. But like ultimately my hope is that if you fast forward a year from now, users will see a very fast growing kind of Agglayer ecosystem. But my hope would be that they actually go to these chains and they start interacting with them, and they don't even realize that they're actually interacting with chains on the Agglayer, simply because that experience is so good. And that's really ultimately the goal, is get to that user experience where it feels like one chain and they don't even know that they're interacting cross-chain. And I think we're going to get there, and it's going to be very exciting for users when that happens.
Okay, cool. And I think that's all for our interview today. And thanks for your time. And hope you can come back again and sharing more progress about Polygon 2.0 in the future. And may everything about you and Polygon a great success.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate you having me.